some, yeah. So in the previous session, I was talking about the idea of engagement with text and how that's very important, because your research, whether that begins with a hypothesis or a question or some premise, is going to involve literature review. It's going to involve ideas of understanding that literature, of deciphering that literature to reach your understanding of the intentionality of the author, or the authorial intentionality. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you say this is what the text means, you are expected as a researcher to be aware of the contestations in the arena of interpretations. And that involves understanding hermeneutical theories ranging from scholars from German schools, as those of Schleiermacher and others, to Gadamer, the idea of text, pretext, context, in post-text, and then moving on to even Marxist notions of power dynamics in interpretations, to postmodernist ideas, to feminist discourses, to queer discourses. I just shared a song in the previous session where, the same poem, which is in the same words, which are sophistic in nature, talking about the temporal and the divine love, is then used for a political and, for a political narrative, as well as for a queer narrative. And that's appropriation. Since those appropriations are there, the contestations are there. And as soon as you reach your conclusions about what a particular text says, you have to be engaged in understanding of the sociological, anthropological, philological theories, because philology is never going to be out of fashion. There's a lot of challenge in Western academia and modern academia regarding philology as the final word. Maybe it is, maybe it is not. I'm not talking about that right now, but certainly something you cannot ignore. You can love it or leave it, but you can't ignore it. I gave some examples in the previous session. I'll repeat that example and then move on to this session where I was talking about Muhammad Asad's translation of where he says that that the believers safeguard their chastity, except with their wives. And Muhammad Asad's understanding through bringing in the context of history and sociology was that those that they right hand possess mean wives. But then the philological contestation would be that how can you fit it into the structure of the sentence that we are all aware of? Believers don't, safeguard their chastity or have relations only with their wives or with their wives. So this or has to be the or of a difference of mughayrat. It has to be waw of mughayrat. So this is one example of the kinds of contestations, and contestations will be within one particular stream as well of anthropology itself, or sociology itself, or psychology itself. And poetry, if anybody who's, there was one gentleman who was from English literature department, anybody who's involved in literature will understand that this is what poets do. Otherwise, in Sanat-e-Iham, the paper that I was referring to, the recent paper that I did for King Fahd University, about 3 papers on AI and hermeneutics being the art and science of interpretation of texts, talked about the idea of ambiguity and how that adds to meaning, and how then that has to be contested. If Ghalib's, for instance, hum bhi taslim ki khoo dalenge, beniyazi teri aadat hi se, if you look at the surface meaning, it seems like a normal share. It's the idea of intertextuality that gives us meaning, and that's very, very important. And before I come to actually avoiding plagiarism, it's important to understand how this notion of intertextuality works as well. because it's a very, very important aspect of engagement with text, which itself is important in terms of your avoidance of plagiarism in a digital in a digital area where you have ChatGPT and so many other devices. And the devices of creation of text might be very powerful. The devices of deciphering that you have plagiarized have become equally powerful, because both things are happening. If it's easy to create text, it's also easy to decipher that they are not your own. So how do you avoid that? One of the strengths that any researcher has is his or her ability to engage with text. For instance, now I was talking about intertextuality. Now, this is something which is so important for any researcher. Does anybody understand what intertextuality is? Let me give you an example. If I asked you, गौर साहब यहाँ participate कर सकते हैं? Can people participate?
Yes, if you want to speak, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Yeah, would anybody like to explain what intertextuality is?
Please raise your hand.
Okay, so the idea is that a text gets meaning in any piece of literature, not just by the words and by the dictionary or the lexicon that we can open up, but also by the other text that's involved with the talmihat, the ideas, the symbols in the tradition. It could be a very simple couplet or a text, like, for instance, let's take Meer's couplet. दूर बैठा गुबारे मीर उससे, दूर बैठा गुबारे मीर उससे, इश्क बिन ये अदब नहीं आता. Now, what's so beautiful about this? दूर बैठा गुबारे मीर उससे, इश्क बिन ये अदब नहीं आता. As soon as we listen to this as speaker, as audience in India and Pakistan, in the subcontinent, there is a tradition that we are already aware of. Those are stories that we're already aware of. We already know what happens in the idea of a poem or a ghazal in Urdu literature, that the lover is going to, die for his ideal, whether that be a woman or a man or a human or an idea or a pursuit or a goal in life, is going to die for it. And that's epitomized by the beloved. And when he dies, even his passion is such that his body turns to soil, and the soil rises and through the wind tries to reach and touch the feet of the beloved. But Mir says he was not able to do that. And we already know it's not written in the poem. It's not written in the poem. It's not written in the couplet. It's not written in the couplet. But we know that. We know that through intertextuality, through our awareness of the tradition. And it says, now, this is a question again, there are mahzufat, they are the implied aspects. I once said, speaking of Mir, that the beauty of Mir's poetry is that his sahle mumtana, his simplicity that is hard to emulate, sahle mumtana, वो मुतल्लक है उन तनासात से, उस इंटरटेक्चुअलिटी से, कि जो अपने मज़ूफात को वाज़े करती है, यानी that explains the मज़ूफात. What Mir does not say is far more beautiful than what he says. जो वो नहीं कहता, वो खूबसूरत है. So he doesn't say this, the idea that the poet has died, his dust is, trying to reach and has not been able to reach. So the question has emerged all around. Why was his passion any less than what was required? This is not what he wants to say. Was his beloved so apathetic and so cruel and so callous that even after death, he did not give any acceptance to his endeavor? No, that's also not something that should be said. So what happened? दूर बैठा गुबारे मीर उससे, इश्क बिन ये अदब नहीं आता. So this is now this idea of intertextuality, whether you read the Quran or you read the Bible, or if you want to understand the idea of the verse, the verse of the eye of the needle in the Bible, you need to understand the idea of the Gentiles and the house of Bani Israel. Otherwise, you do not understand what Jesus said, and you do not understand the woman's response. You do not even understand the idiom where she says, "Oh, Master, even so, when the crumbs fall to the floor, the dogs have their share too." So you need to have that idea of intertextuality. Now, I will not spend more time on this. If you have other questions, we can respond to that. Coming to the idea of literature review itself in a world that is now full of AI devices and what have you, the first thing, obviously, the first step is looking at finding out the right literature to do your research. And how do you find it out? I remember Dr. Zia were here. She would point out the research work that I was in which I was of some service to her, that made us acquaintances. Began with a lot of work that she had done, excellent work. But the question that I had raised, which brought us together as colleagues, was regarding where she got her sources from. And she said, well, she had read this and she had read that. If it's a recondite, difficult area, uncharted area, it becomes even more difficult. But where do you begin? How do you begin? What are the sources you look at? Now, in the Western academia, one of the most important things that they have done, that whenever an institution is built, they focus on this aspect more than anything else. You move into any discipline ranging from graffiti art on the walls to which is a social expression, to hard sciences, to recondite and abstract fields, as maybe metaphysics or cosmology. You will find that they have all the basic foundational resources of enlisting the literature. For instance, in Islamic studies, I mean, there might be scholars of Islamic studies here. You have what is known as Index Islamicus. Now that index, and I've been trying to get, my colleagues and I have been trying to get that at LUMS, subscription at LUMS, and we can't afford the subscription even. Anything written under the sun in English will find a mention there, along with all the reviews that are written on it. Then you have your E.J. Brill's Encyclopedia of Islam. You pick up any topic, Ijma, Qiyas, Ali Shariati, Qazi Sanaullah, Panipati. You pick up any topic and you will find the list there, along with articles written in the Western literature, in classical medieval Islamic literature, along with a bibliography. And sometimes now it's very common now to give you annotated bibliographies as well. Then there are devices that will point you out to the to reviews written on that literature by other established scholars as well. And along with that, you get annotated bibliographies. So that's one important source. But even before that, what people miss doing is that they jump onto sources themselves. And I've seen sometimes seasoned writers making that mistake. They become a little bit lazy and they will just go to Sheikh Google and make him the murshid, or to the lesser Sheikh Wikipedia, or maybe even a more powerful Sheikh or Sheikha. And they will just pick up information from there without even asking or without even questioning the veracity, the level of credibility, the epistemic aspect of it is not looked at, and they will start from there. So one of the key things that I always tell my colleagues and my students is that in hardcore research, in research that will really make an impact. Now, so much is out there. Anybody can ask ChatGPT or devices like that to write something for you. How's your paper going to stand out? Literature produced right now in the academia is so much that it's important. It's almost impossible to look at the lists even. Why should anybody read your paper? I mean, I hope I'm not being immodest still. I'll just give you one example of how research is noticed. You obviously have to fill in your forms every year. I wrote two papers published in C category journals. But how are you really noticed in academia? That's sitting here in Pakistan, for instance. I'm talking about one of my colleagues. I remember I was at McGill doing my PhD there, and the head of the department of Princeton University, head of department of religious studies and Middle Eastern studies, Dr. Qasim Zaman, had come to McGill for a talk. And he was a McGill PhD himself. And after his talk, he said, I don't have any time for questions. I'm just going to be here for 2.5 hours and I'll not be meeting anyone. So please don't come to me. And then he called me and spent the next 2.5 hours with me, asking me only for two things. One of the two things. He was trying to convince me to move over to Princeton to the religious studies department. And please remember that Princeton's religious studies department accepts only, the whole department accepts only one student per year. Per annum, only one student is accepted. And they gave him a lot of money. And he was telling me that they would give me more money than what I'd earn after my PhD. So they said, you could just come over there and move. And I refused because of my personal reasons. Then he talked about another scholar whose name is Amar Khan Nasir, Dr. Amar Khan Nasir. And he said he hadn't done his PhD at that time. And he was publishing a journal in a local madrasa in Gujranwala. Not A category, not B category. I don't know any category that belonged to. And I think Juliet's phrase applied to it, Romeo called by any other name would smell as sweet were it not Romeo called. And this gentleman was, this professor was requesting me to urge Amar Khan Nasir to come over and do his PhD from Princeton, and he only had to take GRE. Amar Khan Nasir refused, and he kept taking out his journal. He did his PhD locally, and right now he is involved with a number of US universities in what is known as Madrasa discourses headed by Dr. Ibrahim Musa from University of Notre Dame. And they are taking scholars under his supervision to Western countries, giving them scholarships. And he was publishing a local paper here without any of these fancy names that we know of in his own field. He was not publishing in Journal of Religious Studies or International Journal of International Law, not A category. What was unique about his writing? So I'm just going to give you that example. Recently, I wrote a paper on a reinterpretation of certain verses in the Quran, and it's called Rethinking Daughters' Chairs, Interpretive Possibilities, Rethinking Daughters' Chairs. And I remember the editor of the journal, which is Journal of Gender Studies at Cape Town, approached me for this article, and I was fighting a legal case in central Punjab and for some land holding that was involved, and I didn't have time. So they asked me to express my ideas on this. And I wasn't able to finish it in the 1 month they gave me. And they gave them wanted to give them a rough draft that I produced. It was about 12 pages. And the editor said, well, you're out of time. It's an international journal, it's an important journal. So you can, just think about submitting some other time. And they looked at the rough draft that I sent. And then they said, you can take as much time as you want. We want to publish it. And finally, it got published. I published about another month later. What was unique was that this is something you wouldn't find in any chat GPT. It was based on philological understanding of the text. It was based on intertextuality, engaging with what the chat GPT will not engage with. So you have your literature review. If you are aware of these hermeneutical theories, if you know how to engage with texts, then the kind of research you will do is something that is only possible in hard sciences. You discover an entirely new species, for instance. You discover entirely different kind of energy field, for instance. Now, this is something that others will not be able to do. And it's possible in social sciences and in humanities as well. So one of the first things to identify an area in which you can do that kind of research is not through these sources that are available for everybody, like Chef Google and Chef Wikipedia, nor even those sources which are respected sources and everybody should go through them. That's a definitive yes, everybody should go them. through expert encyclopedias or through field encyclopedias and those specialized fields, which give you a literature survey and give you annotated bibliographies and point out other articles written by scholars. But as soon as you see names of scholars, big scholars, then as a researcher, once you have read 2 or 3 important big names that are closely related to your area of interest, the best thing to do is to read, write a short review, and send it to the person. Some of my students who have done their PhD in some of the best universities followed this approach. They never applied to the university directly. They read, they zeroed in through the encyclopedias, through understanding who are the important people who have written on this particular topic, who are the important people who are scholars who have critiqued a particular article, and then they would zero in and pick up 3 or 4 scholars, read on them, read their literature, write a review, write a critique, and send it to the scholar and show their interest. As Iqbal said, "In kare hakimi nis damane kalimi gir." That this is not the work of simple hikmat. You need somebody who has talked directly to the source. Sat banda sahil mat yek banda darya mast. 100 people on the shore are not equal to the one who has taken a dip into the vortex of academic tribulation. So once you have approached that scholar or the scholars, and then you share your bibliography and you work under their guidance or you take their hints, then you are on the right track. And they are the people who will give you the best advice on how to create something which is going to go beyond what is already out there. And that was happening before the advent of digital devices like ChatGPT. This is what was happening. People were just picking up stuff from here and there, filling in with citations, and you would produce a PhD. In fact, there was a joke going around that if you plagiarize from one, if you copy from one source, it's plagiarism. If you copy from many and cite them, it's PhD. So one of the important things that we need to do is to identify that area, be aware of the intertextuality of the text, be aware of the hermeneutics of the text, and under the guidance of a qualified person or some of the best people in the field, engage with them, find out how, while bringing in the necessary survey of ideas that is expected in any research paper, you need to give an overview, but that the overview should remain in the category of overview, and it's obviously all fully cited. You explain, and in citation, the simple 3-point rule that is always explained to researcher will always remain there. Any idea that is not originally yours, any fact that is not originally yours, and a peculiar style of writing that is not yours needs to be cited. So we know that, right? Idea that is originally not yours, that's somewhere, and now it's so easy to find it out. Facts that are not originally yours, whether you have gained them through literature or through survey or through experimentation or observation, if it's not really yours, it needs to be cited. And the third, obviously, is that style. This is the tricky part, but now it's very, very easy to emulate style and to find out whose style are you copying. So it has to be unique to you. It has to be your own voice. But beyond that, once you've done the survey, once you have added the required mirch masala that is required to give a context, what is your intervention? The most important question asked of any researcher is, what is your intervention? Where have you added a critique, a fact, an idea that adds to the value of what is already there? In citation, obviously, the basic principle is that whenever you don't obviously have to cite well-known facts, but any fact, any idea, or any style that is not originally your own needs to be cited. And the engagement of text has to be such which explains and shows that that your intervention is there, it's significant, it's adding something to what people already know. So I think I will now leave room for questions, as was asked. आपने कहा था गौर साहब के 10-20 मिनट सवाल के लिए छोड़ दें. So you can ask questions about this session as well as about the previous one.
Requested to please raise your hand if you want to make any comment, or if you have any.
आवाज कम है बहुत.
You can raise your hand and I will unmute you if you want to ask any question or you want to comment about anything. You can also mention that in the chat. So I don't see any comments or any chat. I think so we can continue for another 10 minutes and then we move towards the polling.
Okay. So वो previous session के कुछ सवालात रह गए थे, अगर आप वो मुझसे पूछ लें, क्योंकि मैं चाह रहा था उनका जवाब देना.
I would have to go to the chat box of the previous session.
अच्छा, I remember some of those questions. So let me respond to one of those questions. कि ये जो aspects हैं वो the aspects that I refer to in terms of engagement with text. So what do you need to read to understand? One of the best ways of teaching this idea of engagement with text is either through biblical studies or Quranic studies, or through which is also, literature. It has all the devices of literature. It has onomatopoeia, it has personification, it has synecdoche, it has metonymy, it has everything that a piece of literature has. And it's important to understand how the text is engaged, how you engage with text. So the idea of intertextuality is something that becomes very, very important in engagement with text, especially when you are doing humanities. हमारे यहाँ हो ये रहा है, as opposed to awareness of intertextuality, there is the idea of appropriation as well. Newer meanings are given, meanings that perhaps the original writer would not even have thought about. For instance, this song that I shared in the previous session, this new interpretation given by the Indian lady, where she relates the Sufi idea to, Sufi idea of being separated with the beloved and longing for the beloved, to joining India and Pakistan back together, is obviously an appropriation. She does a good job at that, and she sings it as well later, But how does intertextuality then become a strength for a researcher? How does it show your forte and your strength? If you do not do that, how people who are entrenched in this then are able to wipe you out of the arena in contestations that take place in the academic world? So I was, Ruxana is here. She'll remember our conversation that we had when we were discussing her chapters in which I was of some little service to her. And I insisted, she had gathered a lot of data, and I insisted that we have to go back to the past. She was writing on Islamic education, and I was insisting that you have to begin even with Mullah Shirazi, that nobody has heard about, who was brought in by Jahangir, and he used to design language teaching pedagogies and repeater canons, and his ideas in language teaching had a huge influence in the Indian context. To Mullah Nizamuddin, who's of Farangi Mahal, whose Dars-e Nizami is still in vogue, to Nadwatul Ulama, and to Deoband and to Sir Sayyid and what have you. And Ruxana was like, why do we have to bring all this stuff here? And then finally, thankfully, she agreed that it was important because without that, you just lose. Let me give you another a couple. Is session में मैंने मीर का शेर सुनाया या पिछले में सुनाया? I'm sorry, I forgot.
I didn't share it, Asif.
Was it in this session or in the previous one?
You can.
So I okay. So no, did I talk about? intertextuality in this session, right?
Yeah, you did talk about
Oh,
intertextuality.
okay. So
but I don't remember the
let's take another share by one of his simple share Ashar. And you know, Sahle Mumtana, the word, it's a beautiful term in criticism. Sahle Mumtana means it's so simple that it's hard to create something so simple and so beautiful. You know, so one of his Sahle Mumtana has what is known as idmaj, the idea of pun, which Shakespeare uses a lot. If you cannot engage with text at that level, if you're going to write a criticism, I mean, writing criticism, यहाँ पे literature के हिसाब से, Urdu literature में, in Urdu literature, one of the biggest names in modern times is that of Dr. Shamsur Rahman Farooqi. And he brought in the idea and he explained how people were writing research papers and writing about poetry and literature, for instance, if I might use that field as an example of research writing. And they would write, well, this is a very powerful poem that has been written. It has a lot of pathos. It has a lot of emotion. This is not research writing. Can you explain, for instance, beginning with what meter this is the meter he's adopted. Why has he adopted this meter? Because this meter, for instance, is related to this particular rag, which is a rag of joy, and the ghazal shows that mood. This is literary criticism. When you are able to explain that this is the intertextuality, this is the background. When Amrita Pritham says, "Ajakha vare shanu ki tu kabra vichu bol." I mean, she was a 16-year-old girl who had migrated from India to Pakistan, seen all the massacre and the rape of women around. And when she says, "Ajakha vare shanu ki tu kabra vichu bol, te aj kitab bishakda koi agla varka phol," we immediately know what she's talking about. Ik roi si dhi Punjab di tu likh likh mare van, aj lakhan thiyan rondiyan tenu varis shanu can. Now, what is this dhi? We can only understand if we understand the intertextuality of the whole story of Veer Ranja, written by 70 different poets in Punjab, including Damodar and Waris Shah. We won't, jithe vajdi si phook pyar di, wo vajli gai gawach. If you don't understand the story behind the reed and how it's related even to Rumi, you miss out so much. And then there are the mazufat, the implied, and the tazminat. The implied has to be understood by a researcher. Ki yahan kya implied hai? You're not just an ordinary reader. Ab ye dekhen, for instance, Ghalib ka jo sher hai, this couplet by Ghalib, hum bhi taslim ki khu dalenge. Who is adat? You pick up the dictionary, say who is adat, its habit. Hum bhi taslim ki khu dalenge. Taslim, everybody knows, submission. Be-niyazi teri adat. If you are apathetic, then I will also become used to it. Seems like an ordinary share. I mean, if you're not, if we are a little bit sacrilegious, we might say, "Yaar, ye to main bhi likh sakta tha." What's so great about Ghalib? But then you have to understand the textuality, intertextuality. What is taslim? Taslim is submission from sallama yusallimu. That's one meaning. Taslim is also sallama yusallimu taslim, to offer your salam. But that's not the whole story. In the days when Ruxana and I were, younger people, and I was handsome too, in those days, there was no WhatsApp, there was no chatting, and there was no hi. Even if you did hi, the other person would just do hi. So the connection, the moment the connection would happen would be that a person would come and offer taslim this way. You do taslim. And women would typically turn their face the other way and thinking that the guy is being too cocky and is trying to be too cheeky, and they would walk away. But if she would return the taslim, then there's connection. So Ghalib is creating an idmaj. Taslim means submission. I'll submit to your apathy. But it also means this taslim. So I'll continue to do this. I was talking about this share at LUMS, and I taught this class on poetry, and and as soon as I came out, I saw every boy, doing taslim to girls. Hum bhi taslim ki khu dalenge, be-niyazi teri aadati sahi. When you write critique with this awareness of literature, your paper becomes a different baby altogether. Yeah.
There are lots of questions that are coming up. Gohar, please continue with questions and see what we have for this session. If you remember any from the previous one, please make sure they're taken care of.
Okay, ma'am. About say questions from this one. We have so many scientific publications from Pakistan every year, but no real scientific progress in field. Can ethics help in it? Doing the purposeful research rather than just publishing papers?
Excellent question. There's this theory in education that education leads to progress. One of my friends, who's the CEO, owner of Allied Bank, always talks about it. I invited him to LUMS in the previous semester, and he was kind enough to give a speech talking about the importance of how education leads to progress. But there are other theories as well that progress actually leads to education. It's not just that. The problem with that, and that involves power dynamics. Why we are not able to use to do meaningful research in science is because it's an excellent question. By the way, I can speak hours on this question alone. It's who asked that question? I mean, it's a wonderful question. It's something that touches my heart. One of the most important reasons is that we, and believe it or not, like in our dress, in our mannerisms, in our speaking, in our science writing in social sciences, even in science, we are influenced not by the actual needs and requirements of research or of our society, but by what is fashionable. Because fashionable brings us to the category of elite in the academia and raises our pay scale. I'm sorry to say that. So we are always interested in those things. We will not be interested in research in things that directly relate to us, that are there with us. I remember when I used to teach development economics and finance a long time ago in my previous life. I would always talk about theories by Tom Hagen and Tudaro on how progress, economic progress, will never be a possibility for third world countries until they understand how to develop their indigenous resources, indigenization. I mean, I remember about 25 to 30 years ago, when the Suzuki plant was set up in Pakistan, in 5 years, the government started claiming that we have done 90% deletion and 10% is left. And then 20 years passed and we're still not able to manufacture it locally. So the idea that DHA is progress, progressive people, educated people live here, we are constructing and we are investing is progress, but agriculture is not. It is one of those fashion kind of impositions that has destroyed the country. Saudi Arabia has converted 30% of its sand into agricultural lands, and we have converted 30% of agricultural lands into DHAs. So this applies to science as well. Science doesn't have to be, fancy, microbiology science always. Louis Pasteur, by the way, for instance, began his research on pasteurization while working on development of beer, which he wanted to be better than beer of Germany that had taken over France and in that area. And then he was also developing his research in the area of treating silkworm, production and keeping it disease-free. Sometimes penicillin, for instance, by Alexander Fleming, we know, emerged as a discovery from an entirely different product that he was researching on. So sometimes there's so much around us. In architecture, for instance, why are we thinking of not developing architecture that is actually conducive to our environment and innovating that area? So innovation is the key to research, but we are too often overwhelmed in economics, sociology. I'll just conclude this by saying something in my own area, which is a relevant example. When people go for Islamic studies, There are fashion statements there too. Everybody wants to become an Arabic expert because that's valued a lot. Quran Arabi mein tha, Quran is in Arabic, Hadith is in Arabic. And so if you know Arabic, you are a great researcher in Islamic studies. So why not work on areas that are yours? I mean, how many people know about Mullah Fazul Hassan Saharanpuri, the guy who was requested by the principal of Oriental College, the British Maulana, why don't you come and teach us? He said, I think you Britishers are very rude. And when I come, I don't want the bellboy ringing. And I want my hookah in my class. Next time when I'm there, maybe Ruxana Isaiah can provide me with the shisha. Without that, I won't teach. And all those conditions, and I need a masnad to sit on. And so much literature and such powerful things happening here in your own country, so much possibility for research in science, in biology, in zoology, in plants, but that's not fashionable. So unless we really look for things out of the passion of what is really research and useful to us, I think we'll remain in that mold of staying behind. But there's another part to it, that is the funding part. And who will fund you is also an important question. That's a different story altogether.
Thank you.
I know funding agencies are very particular about what sort of stuff they want to, agendas there are that they want. And so you have to perhaps compromise yourself as a researcher for that funding. And sometimes funding is related to a certain framework or a construct of the mind they want to be drawn as conclusions at the end of the research. There's a question which talks about, is literature review specific to the subject, or should we go with generic terms? And I'm sorry, I did not understand. Rizwanullah, would you like to? Aapko samajh aa gayi hai what
I think, I mean, specific it always has to be, as I said, but as I also explained, in any area, for instance, if you are doing hardcore research in philology of a text, like up Quran ke bare mein, you're working on the Quran and looking at what this verse that I just referred to in the previous session regarding as men as the heads over women, Ar-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa, you're working on that text. And you want to do a purely philological analysis. So you would obviously be looking at the Quran, you would be looking at the tafasir, but in modern research writing, you cannot ignore Amina Wadood, you cannot ignore Fatima Barlas, you cannot ignore Fatima Marnisi. You have to talk, you have to be aware of how people have looked at this ethically and amically, from inside and from outside the tradition. And you have to be aware of the discursiveness of the tradition. Dekhen wo discursiveness ke bare mein, Talal Asad, the way he explains it, it's like a thread. Nobody from, when a discourse emerges and becomes a tradition, so much intellectual energy has gone into it and creates a powerful boundary. You want to come into the threads and add something to it, you have to be aware of the thread itself and the surrounding web around it. Only then your voice will have credibility.
There is a question, but I think it is self again. For me, it is maybe perhaps quality and quantity go by side. This is Allama Iqbal University, Hafiz Rukhsar. Having said that, how can we ensure the quality of research articles by avoiding plagiarism? Quality of research articles by avoiding plagiarism, but that is, you said it yourself, and there's so many other ways. Would you elaborate? Plagiarism is one. Yeah.
Yes, as I said, like, I mean, the basic three-pronged idea of not citing an idea that is not yours, not citing facts that are not discovered or created by you, and obviously language styles not created by you. That's the area where plagiarism happens. Obviously, in any research paper which produces secondary literature, and that's what most people do in humanities and social sciences. In pure sciences, obviously, you have to sometimes do much of the work in labs, and you create something new. Even though in writing paper, you still have to do all that literature review. So to that extent, if you're citing and you've done your job properly, you can avoid plagiarism. But then the important question is, where is your intervention? That is where people realize that you've produced something which is original and unique. The best comment that you get from evaluators is again in three things. It's original, it's unique, and it's significant. It's significant. You've brought in some new material, some new ideas, some new ways of thinking. It's unique. Other people did not look at it or did not discover those facts. And it's significant. It's related to the field. It's important to the field. It's important to society, maybe, at a larger level.
There was a question from Rubab Durrani. She did say, how do you look for relevant literature search for teaching English language? But I had thought that perhaps that was a question for, library search and so on. But nevertheless, would you like to elaborate? And then I would go on to some very interesting comments about your session.
There's so much material now available on this, ranging from situational language teaching to classical grammar translation method on any language teaching. I mean, language teaching theories are there, language teaching philosophies from B.F. Skinner to from behaviorists to Chomsky and so many others. So you read that stuff and you divide. The best way is to devise your own system. I worked on two projects actually. One was with Dr. Wally Sammy Roden from University of Alberta, and another was for a school that a school project that was given to me at Almorid, and developed these language teaching pedagogies and went through almost everything that was available under the sun at that time, ranging from Dr. Maria Montessori to Dr. Huey. And exploring all these techniques that are employed, employing techniques like phonic method, phonic word method, experiential approach. There's no perfect system. You have to be aware of your own environment. You have to go through this literature and devise your own plan. However, as a general rule, because I teach languages as well, as a general rule, when you talk about second language teaching, one thing which this is my own understanding, I've developed courses on that basis, is that one of the problems that we get involved in, and some of the best teachers of language get involved in, is that because they have studied so much, that when they begin teaching, they begin teaching as linguists, not as language teachers. They begin with morphology, syntax, and overload the students with that. That's not how we really learn languages. What I do is that I reverse the process. I begin with sentences in the realm of what Maria Montessori called pragmatics, sentences that are useful. And I try to incorporate Chomsky's idea of universal grammar, because once you have taught those sentences, and if you've been able to fit in grammatical paradigms and syntaxes into it, then students will transform those sentences on their own. I hope you understand the vocabulary and the ideas that I'm giving.
Yeah. Excellent. I just want to go through some comments. I don't see any more questions as I scroll down. Rehana John says, I'm just going to give a brief. She has really, both sessions exceeded expectations, elaborated on simple concepts, and made it so clear and easy. Valuable and informative session. Very interesting session. Rubab, very interesting. Again, Sir Mashallah from, I think it's Mahjabeen. GCU say very interesting session again. Shaista Ali, Sakhar IBA, very interesting. DEII, what does DEI stand for? If you would kindly unmute and explain. Yeah, Gohar, aap bataye. Again, a very informative, very, very informative session. DEII kya hai?
The participant has not renamed their
name. They have not given a name, and even I do not know what does DEII stand for. Please unmute and do explain. University of Kotli, very interesting and informative session. Rizwanullah, ye mujhe university nahi pata, nice and informative, remarkable session. FCCU say Nasir John. Shahida Dilawar, I think she's again FCC, informative and informative for both sessions. I think very informative. AI oh, you say Hafiz Rukhsar. He has actually responded to you in in shairi, poetry. देखा तकदीर की लज़्ज़त जो उसने कहा मैंने जाना सो मेरे दिल
मेरे
में
दिल
है.
में. ये
So
सही
he's
बात.
your match, rightfully so. And
इस पे
Rizwanullah
मैं भी उनको
also.
शेर बताना चाहता हूँ कि आदमी आदमी से मिलता है, दिल अगर कम किसी से मिलता
We could well have a session where one share leads to another. I can see that you, very interesting. Thank you, sir. And again, Rubab Durrani. Library centers are playing a vital role to provide literature to researchers. Absolutely. This is
Absolutely.
again DEII and have no idea what that stands for. Rubab Durrani says, you have cleared my concerns. Research is to search for truth, not just how others put it. Well, again, truth, Asif Iftikhar would debate to high heavens, whose truth, what truth, which lens to look at truth. And again, we will go into another intertextuality debate, right? Thanks a lot for such from GCU, Abbas Khan, for an informative session. And thank you, FCC, for organizing prayers. ZU, I think, is Ziauddin University. Really enjoyed the sessions. Jinnah University for Women, remarkable session. And then Aisha HSA. Again, we do not know what HSA stands for. So it's lots of thank yous and lots of saying that scholarly talk, excellent session, and I join in those voices as well. Many of our health services academy, HSA stands for health. You can see, Asif, that we have a whole scope across the country where people are partaking of this benefit. And we at FCC thought that this is research skills development desperately needed. But I'm going to make another comment. When I listen to you every time, I realize that no session can take the place of understanding of the basic text that you have. And none of us have go through that drill. Nobody perhaps tells us. And I am going to request you that before you session, if you could give a more like a textbook sort of an introduction to some of the terminologies and the terms that you use so that people are more prepared to enjoy it more. I understand those terms for you are easy, but this is not what they would have heard in their own line of education. I definitely didn't go through this philosophical mindset where you read and condense so many texts. I see GCU Abbas Khan. I'm very happy if you sort of unvideo himself and if you would say something. But Shahida Dilawar, why don't you unmute? She is a poetess in her own right at FCCU. Would you unmute and say the verse that you have stated over in the chat? Shahida, if you could unvideo and unmute yourself. Gohar, please see that she is unmuted. Shahida, would you like to recite your own verse? It would definitely make it more interesting. She has written a...
Madam, just appreciate this session and ये मेरी गजल का मतलब है कि चूंकि डॉक्टर साहब अभी खत्म करने वाले हैं सेशन, तो उस पर मैं अपनी एक मोहब्बत पेश कर रही हूँ कि साथ गम 7 मिनट घड़ी झट लम्हा, साथ गम तेरे जाने की तो टाली ना गई, तेरे आने की खुशी दिल से संभाली ना गई.
Wow. Asif, you are being quoted, so enjoy it. Shahida, thank you so much. This was a nice, apt ending to a very remarkable session. And so I thank you, everyone, and thank you all for being here with us. We had at some point 85 participants, but some I'm sure had to leave. There's been a nice 2 hours of stretch with Asif, which is always a delight on so many levels. We have some 66 left now, a lot from all over Pakistan. We are very happy to see you with us, and we're looking forward to being a community of scholars in the years to come. Let's have more exchanges together. And so, Asif, thank you so much.
Honor to be
you.
of service. Honor to be of
Yeah.
service. Thank you.
So goodbye. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.